What made you take this challenge head on?
Well, we're largely associated with Australia's, most popular sport, and I wanted free tickets to matches. That was the first reason. I have this mantra: make them laugh, make them cry, make them pay. And one of our local politicians, she has MND, she told me a story about last Mother's Day and how she had to ask her 14-year-old boy to put on her bra because she could no longer do it. What an act of love and support and devotion. I have also met and lost people with MND for whom it was too much. They made the decision not to have breathing apparatus or not to be peg fed because it was just too much to bear. Those stories don't really get told because we like heroes and we like to be inspired. I don't need to tell you guys, hope is the most precious commodity. I mean, if you could sell it, Nike, Coke, they'd junk their products and just start selling hope. It's the most powerful thing that we have.
My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Matt, before we start with anything else, please tell us what FightMND is focused on right now, what problem feels closest, and what still keeps you frustrated.
I'm lucky enough to head up a fantastic team. So we're a team of about 42 people in at FightMND. We're founded by three guys, one who's no longer with us. He had MND, ALS, as you guys say. Dr. Ian Davis, another guy called Pat Cunningham, whose wife we lost also to MND, and Neil Danaher, who's a bit of an iconic figure in Aussie rules sport. That's the real football where we don't wear any padding or helmets. Just thought I'd get that in early. And he was a great player for my team, for Essendon, but he really became more famous as a coach and was much loved across the nation and across that sporting code. So when he was diagnosed with MND, he decided he wasn't going to muck around, he was going to fight it. And basically his family sat around the kitchen table and worked out what they might sell. And they thought, because it's a winter sport here in Australia, they might sell some beanies, might sell a couple of thousand and raise some funds. So we are about to do this for the 12th time. And we just launched this beanie here yesterday. And we generally hope to sell about 500,000 of them each year. And then we have digital versions and all other kinds of things. And basically that's enabled us to put around about $140 million into research. We're largely driven by research into a cure, and we fund globally. We favour Australia. That was one of Neil's great passions, was that there was really nothing happening here in Australia. We're a bit of a backwater as far as Big Pharma was concerned for clinical trials and the like. And our very own Florey Institute here in Melbourne had about 2 people researching MND. It's now a lab of about 40 to 45. So in terms of where we put the money, we put it wherever we think we can be bold and where we can be urgent. We don't like the pace at which research moves, but we understand it. So right now we just received our grant applications for this year. I think there was 176 from around the world. So we can't fund all of them, but last year we put about $22.9 million into cure research. And we obviously have the dichotomy of care research as well, which we fund to a lesser extent, but we feel a responsibility to get around the community. And definitely our supporters like the idea that we are assisting the development of technology to give people a better quality of life whilst we're in the business of looking for a cure. So that's my short answer. I can give you a 20-minute one, but it's probably going to use the whole podcast.
No, that's great. So when you're doing the work, when you're raising the money and giving out the grants and that stuff, kind of piggybacking off what my dad said, where do you feel like we're really close and where do you feel frustrated?
Well, I feel like we're close in some areas where there's little glimmers of light. So, I mean, without getting too much into the details of MND, ALS, but there's many different sort of ways it can affect people. And there's the genetic version. And we decided that things were moving too slowly. So we brought together a whole lot of researchers. We called it a global roundtable. And the idea was not for everyone to present their work and show their citations and how far they'd come, but like, what's stopping you? Why aren't you talking to each other? And I met a woman there called Paula. It was the first time I'd seen, she was from Canada, a video of someone and then see the effects of MND reversed, where she was struggling to walk up steps and she could now, walk into the room and talk. So I think there's hope in little pockets, but there's no one specific area. The big frustration we found when we brought all the academics together was the lack of sharing of data and understanding, and the fact that people were working in silos and that potentially, pharmaceutical companies, for their own interests and justifiable interests, weren't necessarily sharing information that might advance the cause. And for us, we look at some of the analogies and the metaphors about how quickly the world came together with COVID to find vaccines, how when the world was focused on AIDS, that was believed that there would never be any way to sort of attack that disease. But with a combined international approach, it definitely accelerates things. And that's what we're excited by.
My first question is simple. What made you take this challenge head on?
Well, we're largely associated with Australia's, most popular sport, and I wanted free tickets to matches. That was the first reason. The second reason, I guess, more, and the real reason, is that I love the power of community. I love people coming together. I think that is the most elevating thing of the human spirit. And you will have seen it in your sports, and you've seen it in, when people get behind something. So we build towards this one match where there's, close to 90,000 people at a football stadium, our world famous MCG, and they're all wearing these blue beanies, and they're all there united for both the love of sport, but the need to get around each other. So in Australia, and I don't know if this works in the States, because you're a much bigger country, but when things go wrong, when there's bushfires or floods or disasters, people rally at their local sports clubs. They really are the sort of centre of our regional areas. And it is that spirit of getting around people when chips are down. And that it starts, I think, with team sport. That's where it probably starts with family, but you learn about it with team sport when it's people that you're not related to, but that you want to gather with. So I really love that. And I think, with years and years in radio, you're just connecting with a big audience of people who are either thinking about, laughing about, emotionally connecting with the same thing. And I reckon that's the most powerful thing of the human spirit. The pay was pretty good too.
That community instinct became public through the Big Freeze. You have helped turn the Big Freeze into one of Australia's most recognizable charity campaigns. For people who do not know it, what is the Big Freeze? How did it start? And why do you think it is connected with so many people?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Tim. It really started with the Ice Bucket Challenge, and that was a global thing. And I think that was at it just coincided at the same time as Neil Danaher, our co-founder and the iconic sort of football personality here in Australia, had been diagnosed. So he kind of challenged a lot of significant figures in the game, administrators, other legends. And so it had great early momentum. And then he was also driven by the notion that for people to, do something, it doesn't always have to be sad and driven by plot. It can actually be fun. So we cobbled together the notion of this big slide into a giant ice bath, like more than just tipping an ice bucket on someone, at the MCG, at this match in front of 80,000 people. And, over the years, we've had some of Australia's biggest celebrities and most well-known names, and they get dressed up in costumes. There's a theme each year. And it's part of the match day broadcast now. It's a whole hour that leads up into that particular match. So it's really iconic because it's on a national public holiday. So it's usually raining, so people are inside watching it. So it's a real confluence of circumstances, I think, that built this great, fun moment. And then I think, for that to grow and to develop, it really has been about the community staying with it. Like, we can change things up and try new marketing techniques and have what we think are better looking beanies each year. But really it's about the fact that people want to feel good about what they're doing.
Behind the spectacle, the disease remains personal. I live with ALS, and my family started Tackle ALS to help fund research at Mass General Healey Center. When you meet someone living with this disease, what changes in the way you think about your work?
Yeah, we've got a great relationship with Healey as well, and we're really proud to fund some of their scholarships. We've just funded another 3. It's an amazing organisation, and we're trying to replicate that to some degree in Australia. The government's just given us a great big $40 million grant to set up a clinical trial network. And so that is the big infrastructure, and that is, the big work that we're trying to do around it. As we've said and alluded to, it's tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. But most days I meet someone with MND, and I don't like to use those numbers. And when I speak publicly, I don't like to talk about millions. I love to talk about the connection you make with each people. So on Monday, when we did launch our beanie campaign this year, we've actually made a giant hot air balloon in the exact shape of the beanie. It's the world's first hot air balloon with a giant pom-pom on top. And one of the things we got to do, which was really, really powerful, was we took a gentleman with MND called Hasmir, who works for one of our sponsor companies, and his wife and his little girl up in that balloon. And that was just amazing. We were floating above the city in another balloon, looking at this giant inflatable beanie. And then he gave a speech with his daughter, and he just said it had really connected with him that literally MND research and the hope that he gets from seeing people support it by buying those beanies is like being in a hot air balloon, that it's moving in the right direction, but winds will come and go and shift it, but it's still drifting towards ultimately where you want to land. And he said, the wind is the support of the community. And I was like, wow. You know, for me, I was just enjoying taking photos of the city and thinking it was amazing, trying to zoom in on my house. My wife sending me photos in the car underneath saying, I can see up there. But for him, this was a complete representation of his life and the meaningfulness around people supporting that, strangers supporting that. And that's for us. Even this morning, I was just walking my dog and I was going past a building site. Now, beanies have only been on sale for a day, and there was a bloke up on the roof, just, you know, and it's raining and he's wearing a beanie. And I thought, you're a complete stranger to people with MND, but when they see you or when I see you, we haven't sold $25 worth of woolen hat. We've sold a little bit of hope. And that's what I hear all the time when we meet people with MND, ALS. They know there's no instant diagnosis, so they're losing months before they find out. They know there's no cure, but they know there's a lot of people working on it who they've never met. And I think, you know, I don't need to tell you guys, hope is the most precious commodity. I mean, if you could sell it, Nike, Coke, all of them, they'd junk their products and just start selling hope. It's the most powerful thing that we have. Other things, Tim, you know, when I think about stories that sit with me that are really powerful, it's Mother's Day this weekend in Australia. And one of our local politicians, she has MND, she won't be recontesting, but she told me a story about last Mother's Day and how she had to ask her 14-year-old boy to put on her bra because she could no longer do it. And they're the kinds of things that you just don't forget. You think about what a powerful moment that is for a family, how awkward it is for a 14-year-old boy to imagine putting his own mother's bra on. But what an act of love and support and devotion. And I think they're the things that sit with me, and they're the stories I like to tell rather than, oh, you know, we funded 2 projects at Oxford Uni, we funded some stuff at Johns Hopkins, or, you know, I think that's the most powerful part of this work.
That ability to move strangers started earlier. You came from radio, where the job was to get people to listen. When did you realize attention could be turned into something much more serious?
Oh, it's a great question. You might regret asking it because I could go on for another hour here. So, you know, I was effectively, you know, a comedian, and I used to do these prank phone calls. And I was approached by a record company to put some of them down on a CD. People probably don't remember CDs. And I thought, oh, that'd be good. And I don't know why. I just thought, rather than us take the profits, you know, I was paid okay to be in radio. Let's give all the money back. Let's give it back to charities. My boys had been born in intensive care and had a lot of problems. So the first one, I think we gave away $500,000 to the intensive care unit of the hospital. And then we realised, like, one, it was really good for sales to say that, you know, proceeds were going to charities, but also it was a great way to connect with the audience. So the next one that I did, all the profits, we gave to organisations where $5,000 would be life-changing for them, just little tiny small organisations, you know, people that had built playgrounds for disabled children, just small things like that. And I mean, look, hearing laughter is great, but when you work on the radio, you don't hear it. People are sitting in their cars. But I think hearing emotional responses to you changing what you think is just a small gesture, and that is basically changing something people have been working on for years, I find that really, you know, it's a bit of a drug. I kind of enjoy doing that. And also doing that with a team of people. And that's what we are. We're a really tight team at FightMND.
When you were doing those things on the radio and the prank calls and all that, I mean, doing $500,000 in sales, it must have been really popular.
Yeah, I think it was pretty popular. I think one year Madonna and I launched on the same day in Australia, and I outsold her. I say, oh, we did. But also I had this, I couldn't, I'd be cancelled now if I did some of that stuff. Like, I'm not saying I'm an old bloke, but it was kind of back in the day when you could have a bit more fun and things were a bit less precious. So, yeah, we sold a heap, but also it's all we talked about. So that was a pretty powerful advertising campaign.
Was there a moment at FightMND when you thought this is not charity work from a distance anymore?
Yeah, I think that a lot when I meet people with MND. We call them, inside our organisation, we call them people with lived experience, and that gets shortened to PLEX, which it sounds a little bit uncaring when you're having a chat, but I guess we talk all the time that in everything we do, we need PLEX in the room. So we're connected with lots of people with MND, and that's the critical thing. I mean, you've just hit it on the head there, Tim. We can't be from a distance. This can't be a patronising situation where we're like, oh, we feel sorry for you. We're going to spend some money to change your life. It's like, no, we understand you and we hear you and we're with you. That's what drives us. And that is a great way to be, and that's a great set of values to have, but it's also a pretty good business model, because if we only talk at the high level of finance and laboratories and we're only showing pictures of people in white coats with blue liquid injecting it into, beakers and the like, that's pretty meaningless for people. But I think if you tell your story and you see children and you see people cognitively coming to terms with the fact that this isn't going to be forever, that's not from a distance. That's something we think about every day. And more critically, our founder, Neil Danaher, his wife and daughter both work at our organisation. They're front and centre. So every day we've got considerations around the fact that if anyone has any illness, just the slightest sniffle or cold, you're not to come in the office, because the consequences of cross-infection and how that might affect a family situation where, Neil is incredibly vulnerable towards infection, his incapacity around breathing and things like that. We're thinking about it every day.
That closeness begins with Neil's public role. Neil Danaher, a famous Australian rules footballer, gave FightMND a face, a voice, and a sense of urgency. Tell us about Neil.
Well, I've got a sort of slightly personal connection. So Neil is famous for one particular incident in Aussie rules, in that there was only ever one occasion in the history of our game where four brothers played in the one game. And Neil's older brother, Terry, was actually a premiership captain of the side that I support. Neil played for that side, but was crippled by a knee injury, and his career was brought to a premature end. But in my job interview with him, I had to tell him that he was actually my third favourite Danaher, and that his brother was my favourite because he'd been the captain when we won a premiership. His other brother was my second favourite because my mum found it easier to stitch his number onto the back of my jumper. And so he'd have to settle for being my third favourite Danaher. But I think really he came to prominence as a coach. His nickname is the Reverend because he used to give great sermons and was a great speaker. And he's also, there's some great footage of him also going off his nut. He's a very passionate coach as well. And he got one of the oldest teams into the grand final. So, that was a great degree of success. They'd been lifted off their knees. So, he really is quite an iconic figure. But I think it's more the fact that what he's done now and the fact that he turns up, and it's very difficult for him to get out of the house now, but he was named Australian of the Year last year, which is a pretty big thing in this country. And that showed us that he'd sort of broken out beyond the code of football, and there was a ubiquitous sense of awe about what he'd been able to achieve.
When someone becomes the public face of a disease, how do you protect the person from becoming just a symbol?
Yeah, it's a great question. And look, I feel like we can be pretty raw in this podcast too. As his condition deteriorates, there's a great expectation from the public that they'll see him each year at this match, and he sits at the bottom of this giant ice slide and the celebrities get out and give him a hug. But there's going to come a point where the majesty of that has been replaced by, I guess, people being agog at just how horrible his condition is right now. That's something we have to consider because he is a very public face. And his daughter Beck, who works for us, has sort of taken on that role as well. And so she's well known and well loved by the public. But it's always the element of them being together. And so there's been moments in the last 6 months where he hasn't been there, and that invites all kinds of questions and people move in all kinds of different directions. So we really have to protect him in those moments. We think that it's important to be honest with the public because, I think, as you guys know, the average life expectancy for someone diagnosed with this condition is around 27 months. So he's been going for 12 years, and we have to educate the public the fact that he's a real outlier and that this is a really, lucky is not the right word, but in the context of the general public, that he's lucky to have had such an extended life. Some people get 6 to 10 weeks. So as much as we love the fact that he's a public figure, it does bring some challenges, but ultimately we want to protect him first and foremost.
ALS took away my natural voice, but technology lets me keep having conversations like this. When you see that, does it change how you think about a cure? I know the ALS world is very split on medicinal versus technological help.
Yeah, so this is a really powerful one for us, this voice-assisted technology, because Neil, our founder, was quite comfortable with the robotic voice that came with his eye gaze technology. And I was at a conference in Canada and came across the 11 Labs people. And, as that technology was evolving, his family talked about it. And Neil was pretty adamant that he didn't really want that. And it was when it was brought to his attention that his grandkids were a bit intimidated by that robotic voice and they would really love to hear their puppy's actual voice, that his thinking started to turn around. And because he could no longer speak when this technology was available, I think this is a similar story to you actually, Tim. Fortunately, because he'd been in the media a lot and addressed football teams a lot, there was a data bank of recorded voice in his actual voice tones. Unfortunately, being a football coach, there was a lot of swearing in there, so it was a little more complicated. I mean, that's not true, but that's what I always say. It took him an extra year just to get out all the swearing. But it was, and we were sort of thought that was a great story for his family. And then we held a press conference to announce something else. And the minute he started answering using his voice, like the faces on the assembled media were just transfixed, and we hadn't even mentioned to them that this technology was now being used. And that actually became the story, and we realised there and then that of course that means more to people than another drug being tested, another $1 million going towards the laboratory. This was life-changing stuff. I think it's really critical. I'm sort of trying to refashion the approach of our board, who are very determined to find a cure, to say, we don't want to take our eyes off that. But in the meantime, we have to start assembling and supporting the organisations that look after people every day. And the technology that's available is spectacular, and the speed at which it's moving, and it's not just for MND, it's for the whole world when we look at AI. But I was talking to a guy who heads up a company, an American-based company called Synchron, last week. Now, they've developed technology where they're going to be able to put a chip up through someone's neck. It'll sit in the blood vessel on the top of their brain, and they'll be able to think control their mouse, think control a feeding device. Now, that's unbelievable. And that's all Bluetooth controlled. There's no external connections to things. As I said to the guy, what happens if you're near Spotify? Is that going to interfere with the Bluetooth transmission? But that is unbelievable, to think that something could just be placed inside you and it's going to sit in your head, and the power of thought is going to be able to control devices around you to change people's lives. And, the basic things around feeding and communication, I think that's critical. Why wouldn't we be advancing that as much as we're advancing the cure?
So we just had Synchron on. That episode came out a few weeks ago.
Right.
Yeah, it's great timing. And then the second part of it is why did Neil not want to use the 11 Labs voice at first? I'm curious.
He's a tough old boot. He's a no fuss guy. He's kind of like, if it works, that's fine. So he comes from a family of 11 farmers. As I said, there's only 4 brothers. They all played football at the highest level. They're hard as nails. And so I think he's like, no, it's not about me. As long as it works, that's fine. So, and look, he's softened a lot as he's got older. I guess as you do as you have grandkids and things like that. But he released a book last year, which was called The Power of Choice. And it's a wonderful, not only is there some great advice in there, and he really has distilled a lot of the thoughts around what's important in life from other people with insights. But you see there's been a softening of him and an awakening of him as to how he'd always done something one way. And when you do something one way and it's successful, you think it's the best way. But it's only when you reflect, I think, or listen to others, and he's become a great listener, that you open yourself up to like changing what you thought was always right or what you thought was important.
That brings up the harder trade-off. When you are looking at people who need help today and people who need a cure tomorrow, how do you decide where the urgency goes?
Well, it's a great question, Tim. I think ultimately the decision was based around a percentage that I think we were sort of 85% cure, 15% care. And I always remind our organisation, cure and care they're internal terms. People in the outside world don't think about things like that, or necessarily make that a financial division or a business strategy. I think the thing that really strikes me when I speak to people with MND is how long it takes for them to find out that they've got finite time left. So I think they'll probably come together, they'll probably be coupled if we can find out a test that whether you have a diagnostic test, a biomarker, that probably is going to unlock the door to a few things around how we might find a cure. But the spirit of us and the spirit of getting around people in their moment of need means we must focus on care. We have to focus on quality of life. We have to focus on enduring human connections and giving people who love each other the most amount of time together. That's what drives us, I think. Well, that's what drives me, because I'm the boss. I give a bit of a say, so I can force everyone to do that. But I think slowly the world's realising that. I mean, I was reflecting upon this morning, that we were talking about whether sales figures would be affected by the price of petrol going up and all those sorts of things. And I used to work in food relief charities. I think when the chips are down, often people are at their best, and that's when they rise. So I'm really optimistic that even though there's huge financial pressures on people here, and I know there is across the States as well, and everybody's confused as to why there's these global conflict moments that are now affecting them in their day-to-day lives in terms of resourcing and cost of living and access to food and the basics. I think that's when people go, I actually just want to feel like I belong, and I want to feel good about my world, because I can't control the outside world. So I'm really bullish about the fact that I think when things are bad globally, they tend to be good locally in terms of how people connect with each other.
Is there anything that ALS and MND charities say in public that sounds right but feels too simple when you are close to families living with the disease?
Yeah, so we're pretty close to some of the organisations. Each state in Australia has an MND association, and then there's a federal body that oversees them, MND Australia. And they have a great saying, which they say, which is, until there's a cure, there's care. It sounds really simplistic, but I actually think it's really good. And it explains exactly what they're about. And we are, I think, a little bit frustrated in our 12th year of telling people we're striving towards a cure. And of course, the number one thing people say to us is, right, how far off are we? And, that's a how long is a piece of string answer. And it could be, the speed at which things move with AI, it could be next year, but science is slow. And I've got 8 people with PhDs on our team who carefully assess all our grant applications and things. And they come from worlds where, 3 years is not a long time. For me, 3 years is a crazy amount of time. And I'm impatient to be able to say, all right, I need some messages to tell the people why they should stick with us, because people aren't stupid. If they're not seeing results, they'll find something else where they feel like they're getting bang for buck. So that is really hard. But I think in the care space and in the advancement of technology and stuff, that's enough for people. I think they think if people living with MND and ALS are actually having a better quality of life or managing to have more precious moments and being able to interact and connect in simpler ways, that's a win. And that's the challenge for us, is to try and keep reminding them of that and to stick with us whilst we've still got the main fight going on.
That's something we've talked about with Merritt Sokovich, my dad's doctor at the Healy Center. It's like even when things are working or not working, like tell people, because when you feel like you're donating money and it just goes into this
Yep.
box and you never hear anything, it's like, yeah, why should I support it? They didn't find a cure when I gave them $20 last year. Why would I do it this year? You know, that kind of.
Oh, look, you're so right, Troy. So, and we have to be really careful of that because, we're not on the stock market or anything like that, but people hold us to a much higher standard than they do big companies across the world. So, even when we put up this hot air balloon on Monday, right, and people look at it and go, how much did that cost? And I have to be able to say, well, it didn't cost us anything. We're actually selling flights in that balloon. It's going to make us a little bit of money, but it's great publicity for our launch. But no one says that about Coca-Cola. No one says, well, how much are you spending on advertising? Surely my can of Coke could be like $1 cheaper if you just spent a bit less on that. But
So true.
nobody's held to account like that. And we're like, yeah, but we're not even making any profit. And when we do, we're giving it to a greater calling. But for some reason, people all the time, and I talk about this with our board all the time, they want to know how many cents in the dollar are actually going to research. And I'm like, well, can you run your business without a photocopier? Would your staff be happy if they went to the tea room and it was just water? Like, we need to attract good people to do the hard work. We're just like any other business. So nobody wants to hear that. They're like, oh, what? 30 cents in every dollar is going on wages and meeting room costs. I might move on and find somewhere where it's 80 cents in the dollar.
Then the money question gets more complicated. When you ask people for money, what do you try to make them understand that a slogan cannot carry?
Yeah, there's many types of people who give us money, right? And we attract a lot of big corporate partners. Australia's largest supermarket chain stocks our beanies. Australia's most loved and most revered hardware chain and our most successful retail operator also sell our beanies. And when I'm talking to them and the big wigs in those organisations, I tell them what I told you before, that they're selling hope bit by bit by bit. And even though they don't see it, people living with MND see it, and it absolutely drives them. To individual donors, it's about inclusion and saying, every time you buy that beanie, you're in a club. So over the next few weeks, I'll be walking down the street, someone will be walking their dog wearing a beanie, and there's just a nod you give each other. There's just a recognition and understanding, yep, we're all part of that. And that just slowly builds to this special moment at the MCG when 90,000 people are sitting there and having that feeling. And we'll put videos up and we'll have stories being told by people with MND. And I think that'll really bring an inner glow to people about, yeah, I'm wearing this hat, but oh my goodness, we're wearing this hat and look what it's doing.
What do you think that, because the hat's a great thing, but 500,000 of them, it's like, that's massive. What do you think it is about the hat? I mean, obviously he was a popular name and sounds like a great family and all that good stuff, but what made it catch fire like it did? Was it the Ice Bucket Challenge? And
yeah, it was definitely the Ice Bucket Challenge where it kicked off. But I mean, the funny story is that, and it's best told by the family, but when they first thought about this, Neil was adamant that beanies were stupid and no man would wear anything with a pom-pom, and we had to go with bandanas. And his wife and daughter convinced him that he knew a lot about football, but he knew nothing about fashion, and that it was going to be a beanie. And also, look, I'm trying to think of an equivalent word that you guys might use. It's a bit of a daggy, bit of a doofus thing to do, to wear a beanie here, and that's us. We're really like, down in the dirt, just your average Joe charity. We don't have big fancy balls and things like that. We just like connecting with the everyday. And I think that's what's resonated too, is that it's just something a bit silly you can do, and definitely the Ice Bucket Challenge and the giant ice slide. And in the end, people want to have fun. And I'm really powerful with the team on that to say, look, this is a god-awful disease. It's insidious, but no one wants to be reminded all the time how awful things are. They actually want to be reminded how they can make a difference and how they can make things better. And they want to have a laugh while they do it. And I don't think that's in any way disrespectful to the work that we're doing. It actually makes it more powerful and more successful.
What has FightMND learned the hard way about turning public attention into real research progress?
Yeah, I think what we've learned is that whilst we move at speed and we want things to happen quickly, the world of academia and scientific research is slow, and people who are great in the laboratory aren't necessarily great at administration. And, I find one of the frustrating things is we've got a lot of money we've committed to researchers that they should have in their bank accounts, but for whatever reason, for the bureaucracy of their organizations, we're like, guys, you've got this outstanding amount. You need to invoice us. You need to send us our reports. And I think it's not necessarily learning anything the hard way, but it's learning that, when different worlds collide, that can create amazing energy, but it can also create friction. And I think that whole everybody wanting to move at different speeds or everybody having different understandings about what's important, what we should focus on, is a challenge. And I think as an organisation, we've gone from sitting on the sidelines saying, well, you guys work it out, we'll just keep giving you money because you know more about it than us, to taking a lead role. And I think in us setting up this global roundtable organisation that we have, where we're sort of trying to get everybody in the room, please don't put up any PowerPoint displays, talk to each other, connect, find out why things are being duplicated, find out why it's hard for one part of research to move forward and yet the other one is tracking off in a different direction. That's sort of, I guess, what we've learned the hard way. Well, it's not necessarily learning the hard way, but it's been the maturing of us to go, okay, well, we've been in this fight long enough now. We do know a bit about it. It's not out of line for us to try and push things along.
Tackle ALS sends money to the Healy Center at Mass General, and FightMND is also trying to move serious research forward. What should ALS and MND charities be doing together across countries that we are not doing enough now to gain efficiencies?
Yeah, that's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it, Tim? I mean, I go to international conferences and the first thing people do is walk up to me and say, oh, give me the name of your beanie supplier. We want to do that too. And I'm like, it's just, as I said, a confluence of special circumstances. Climactically, it works. It was a moment in time when the Ice Bucket Challenge took off. There's no one way to do it. One of the things I think that would be useful for organisations is to get a deeper understanding about the organisations focused on care. Spending time having to raise funds feels like a distraction to them. Like, let's keep them focused on what they're good at, which is delivering care and understanding and connection for people living with MND. And then organisations like us should maybe take a greater role in funding them to do their work rather than just funding research. That's sort of a sensibility that I know works in the Netherlands. And they basically say to the organisations that care for people with MND, don't you worry about fundraising, we'll get you the money, you focus on looking after people. And also because to some degree, sometimes there can be a bit of sabotage where two organisations in the one country are trying to raise money for the same thing, and particularly for people inside the MND community, they're conflicted about what to support and what's going to give greater value. So I think to simplify it, and I don't know if you can do that globally, but that makes the most amount of sense to me.
Is there something like, if there's something that if you had a magic wand and you could force every nonprofit, every charity, everybody in this space to do, what would it be?
I think to consolidate, to come together. And, we're lucky. It is a rare disease. And so we're lucky in terms of there aren't all these disparate groups. There's not many at all. And that's in Australia. I can't speak for the States. And then I go to conferences where you realise that, the MND Association of Vietnam is just one guy who's an MD, and his father had ALS, so he's taken it on. But I think the whole thing is duplication is nuts. I mean, it's just crazy to me, and I get very frustrated. And I've seen it in the food relief sector. You see it in all kinds of medical conditions, from cancer to diabetes, and they all go to government with great pleas for funding and stuff. But I can see why governments go, you should perhaps get your own house in order, and be a more streamlined outfit, and then it would make sense for us and be more efficient for us to give you greater funding. And the reason that's complicated is because most people who come to these organisations do throw because they've got a big heart, not because it's a career move. So they're strongly and really emotionally connected. So the idea of rationalisation and saying, well, maybe you guys should just merge and just have one board is difficult to navigate because people, they've invested big parts of their life into what they think is the most successful way, the most right way. And that's not to say that two ways of coming at something is a bad thing, but as I say, it's the duplication and the frustration that would be great if that magic wand could just iron it out. Probably would use the wand to find a cure first, then we'd work on the organisations.
What do you think could start people down that path? Like, is it the bigger organizations like yours going to the smaller ones, asking them to kind of join in and fold in, or do you think it's like how would that even start?
Well, we are starting it. I think just our last board meeting, we invited the national organisation that looks after the care of people with MND to come and present their strategy, and said, right, let's set up a working group. Let's work together on this. So what I just shared with you around that notion that we'll raise the money, you take care of everyone. I think everybody sees the sense in that. It's just complicated. For example, a lot of organisations that I'm just talking about, how I go, look, don't you worry about fundraising. We'll take care of that. We'll fund you. They're critical moments in their existence and in their calendar. So if they're doing like a relay run around a lake or something like that, that's actually really powerful for them, not in terms of fundraising, but in terms of connecting with their community, connecting with the MND community, building morale amongst their staff and having a goal to work towards that's tangible, as opposed to just day after day relentless caring for people for an illness of which there's no cure. And we don't want to be arrogant or hubristic and sort of look like, listen, we know better. You just do what you do and we'll take care of that. I've talked a lot in this podcast about it's the power of connection, and sometimes those little fundraising events, even if they're not efficient, even if they don't raise great money for the resources that spent getting them off the ground, there's an intangible, amount that's raised, and that's sort of camaraderie and spirit. So we've got to be delicate and respectful of that as well.
Yeah, I wish there was a way to make all the science community come together too, but it's a little bit compartmentalized, at least in the States. Like, you've got places like MGH, and you've got places in New York City. You've got all these places, all these education centers, all these research places.
You've got different
It
governments.
does seem like divide and conquer if everyone took like one different thing, but
I agree. And also, you've got different motivations. So, like, researchers want to find a cure because they've dedicated their life to it. Big pharmaceutical companies want to find a cure because they're going to make money out of it. Now, it's not 100% that way for everything. I mean, there's researchers who probably think if they do fashion some sort of cure or some sort of technology, that's a transition of their life, and that, they might move out of the laboratory and do well and set up companies. But their primary motivation is the work that they do and the study that they've done since they're very young. But pharmaceutical companies are commercial operations, but that doesn't mean there's not good people in there who went there because they want to make people's lives better.
Inside the lab, urgency has to become human. When you sit with researchers, what questions do you ask on behalf of the families who are waiting?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because when we held this global roundtable, we made sure that people living with MND were inside the room during the sessions, in the brainstorms. And so you've got someone sitting in an electric motorised chair next to an Oxford University professor. And it was interesting talking to them afterwards about what that experience was like for them, and how they said, I dedicate my life to this work, but I very rarely, unless, they're clinicians, I very rarely see or speak to anyone with MND. And that's our job, I think, to keep, one of our values is urgency. And I think nothing builds urgency more than for researchers to actually see lived experience.
People with ALS and MND need progress now, but science is always slower than the need. What is slowing progress down today? And what does that gap feel like when you think about the families waiting?
Yeah, well, I think progress is slow, but in the last 5 years, we've seen AI sort of eke its way into the world in ways we don't even really properly understand yet. And there's still a bit of shock and awe. I mean, I basically use AI to take photos of my friends and distort them. But when you see what's actually happening in the world of scientific research, um, it's phenomenal. So I don't think necessarily that because it's slow now, it's going to be slow tomorrow. I think things can happen quickly and tangents can happen off to the left. A couple of examples I think about also, and we bought a big drug screening platform. A lot of researchers realize that to get an actual drug from zero to the market takes years and years and years. But there are lots of drugs that have already had approval and been through clinical trials that might have extra benefits. So the two clearest examples of that, obviously, are Viagra, which was originally a heart medication, and Ozempic, which was originally for diabetes-based conditions. Now, really, their commercial value and their greatest success is for something entirely different. And the drug screening platform that we funded in the Flora Institute, does that work all the time with living brain cells of motor neuron disease. And that perhaps that sort of, it's not necessarily going to be a magic bullet, but there'll be this strange discovery where you go, wow, who knew? That was originally developed for this, and now look at it. It's having extraordinary effects when combined with another drug in terms of the effects of MND in terms of either slowing them down or opening up doorways towards how we can recognise the disease more quickly.
Your work gives people hope. Have you ever worried that hope might come too early?
Yeah, I do think about that. And I think about the notions of success bias. And, when I talk to people like you or when I talk to Neil, there's incredibly powerful, uplifting stories because you're unique individuals who've decided to take this fight head on. But I have also met and lost people with MND for whom it was too much. And in the end, they made the decision not to have breathing apparatus or not to be peg fed because it was just too much to bear for them. Those stories don't really get told because we like heroes and we like to be inspired. But I am always aware that for some people, hope is just that. It's not a real thing. It's something inside your mind ultimately. And the minute your mind decides that that's irrational and that it's actually hopeless, then, life force can evaporate pretty quickly once you've made that decision. And everybody's different. And I meet lots of people with MND who feel like they're failing because they're not delivering like Neil delivers, our founder. And they wish they could do more. And I'm like, you've just got to live your life. You need to concentrate on what's precious to you. Just because you've been burdened with this disease doesn't mean you also have to accept this obligation to fight on behalf of everyone else. I don't have those conversations a lot, but I think about it a lot.
Hope and humor seem close in your work. You've spent years making people laugh for a living. Has this work changed what you find funny or when you choose not to be funny?
Well, it's probably subjective. There's probably lots of people who would say, you were never funny. I don't know how you even had a job. But I kind of have this mantra, right, which is people want to be moved. People want to feel something. And we're increasingly deadened by social media and ubiquitous experience. And I have this mantra, just me personally, but I try and tell my organisation, it's a pretty simple business model. Make them laugh, make them cry, make them pay. And, if that's what I can contribute or in some way grow that, then that's the thing. I don't think I've lost my sense of humour, apart from the fact that I've had 3 kids who've now become adults, and that tests your patience and your sense of humour at the best of times. I think it's important to never lose your sense of humour. I think it's right up there with your sense of hope.
Underneath all of that is the question of meaning. I have found a lot of stability in my life through faith, and I'm always curious how others approach it. Has this work ever pushed you to think differently about suffering, hope, or what you believe beyond the work itself?
Yeah. I guess what I've reflected upon the most and what I talk about is the fact that this disease doesn't discriminate. And depression is the same, mental health, lots of things like that. And there's 2 ways you can fall on this. You can question higher beings and the notion of faith and go, how could someone all-knowing and all-conquering allow this to happen? It seems completely unfair. And then the other side of that coin, of course, is, yes, but isn't that what grows the human spirit? Isn't it through our suffering and our capacity to think of others before ourselves, which is effectively what my job description is to try and harness that. That's the ultimate faith, no matter what religion you might align yourself with. And I haven't really reconciled it. I just sort of think about it and say, well, probably people will make their own peace with that. So I can't really get too deep on that, Tim, necessarily. That's probably an answer you'll edit out, saying he didn't even make any sense at all. But yeah, it's. I think I like to just get busy with the work rather than ponder it too much. But it's an important thing to do.
Matt, if there's people listening to this in either the US, Australia, anywhere in the globe and they want to help, what do you recommend they do? Because some people are sitting there listening to this saying, whether, hey, I don't have $20 to give, or I have more than $20 to give, or can I help with my time? Things like that. Like, what do you recommend people do?
Yeah, I like to be pretty straight up about this. We aren't short of volunteers and help in terms of the actual physical work that we do. But yeah, I think as we've talked a lot here, it takes money. And I'm not saying give me your salary for the week, but the whole point of us is if everybody gives a little bit, that's a hell of a lot. So jump online, go to bigfreeze.com.au and get a digital beanie, because it'll cost us way too much money to send it to you in the States. It probably costs more than the beanie itself. But that's, I started on this path by setting up my own charity. I'd done a diploma in business governance for charities, and I thought I'll try that practically. And I'd always had this belief that if everybody in Australia gave just $1 on one day, that'd be $27 million instantly. And so I ran it, and I thought, when do we all do the same thing? Oh, when we have to vote. It's compulsory voting here in Australia. What if I set up hundreds of volunteers across all the election booths and asked people for just $1, just drop $1 in here? And I tried it as a business model, and it was pretty powerful. People sort of got behind it. But then, as you know now, nobody has real money anymore. In Australia, the voting rules have changed, so you can vote across 2 weeks. So we would have needed hundreds of thousands of volunteers to man all the polling booths. So it didn't really work out. But I think that stayed with me, which is for just a tiny amount that wouldn't really inconvenience you. If we all do it, that'll make a big difference. I think of that great thing that Muhammad Ali said, the shortest poem ever written, which is me, we. And that's the spirit of us. So I'd encourage people to think about that.
Yeah, I think sometimes people get intimidated when they hear about these things and, raise $10 million, raise $20 million. They're like, well, what the heck does my $1 mean? But it adds up.
Troy, in one of my early meetings with some significant donors, they're quite a wealthy family and they lost their mother to MND. And we'd pushed all these glossy brochures under them, telling them about the tens of millions we'd put into research. I hadn't done that. People before, and they're like, gosh, and we only give you $100,000. It doesn't really feel like it makes a dent at all. And I'm like, do you know how many beanies that is? Like, that makes a huge dent. But you're exactly right, Troy. I think people think, oh, well, they keep talking about $140 million as if my $25 makes a difference. I'm going to take it somewhere else. They've got heaps of money. But we've only got that amount, increment by increment by increment.
Yeah.
That's our model. That's what's worked. So if we lose that, we lose everything.
Before we close, I always ask our guests to brag about their family for a minute. Matt, please go ahead.
Right. Well, we were just out for a birthday dinner the other night, and my kids were once again indulging in the age-old argument they have about who is the favourite child. And I said, look, I've been really clear about this since you were born. Whoever was going to be the best and most successful at sport was going to be my favourite. But you've all failed, so I love you equally. But they are doing well. I've got a 24-year-old daughter who's pretty sassy, and she's in the building trade. She's just done a master's on project management, and I'd be intimidated by her if I was on a building site. So she's going really well. My middle boy wants to be the next tech bro. So he's involved in a company that he's developing temperature control covers for AI computer racks. And we know that there's lots of data centers being built, so he's going well. And then my youngest bloke, he's just a lad. He likes beer, he likes football, he likes working as a labourer, and he's at university. He likes girls. He's just, the all Australian guy. And my wife, she is the most remarkable mother, and it's Mother's Day coming up this weekend. I think this is the first time I've sent a text message to them all saying, you better have some good plans, guys. Like, I'm obviously taking care of her. I always cook her favourite lunch. This is the first time they've all replied with the thumbs up emoji. So I think I'm making real progress.
Small steps.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, that's meaningful.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid-fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
3 moments, kids born.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
Losing my mum. She died of alcohol poisoning.
What are you most excited about?
Grandkids.
What advice would you give your younger self?
You're enough. You'll get there.
Do you have any book recommendations for us or for the listeners?
I was thinking about this, given how many books Tim's written. I'm like, I haven't read books for ages because I'm a podcasting addict. How will I possibly explain that to him? And then I'm like, I'm going on his podcast. That completely justifies it.
All right, how about a podcast then?
I think probably the one I listen to the most is The Daily, which is the New York Times. And then I'm a mad cycling fan, so I listen to lots of road cycling podcasts as well. But I hate to say this, it might be sacrilegious on this podcast, but I'm not a Lance Armstrong fan.
That's all right. Why not? Because
because of all the stuff. So he does a podcast, and when he's not on it, I listen to those ones. It's petty, I know, but it's just, it's who I am.
Respect the game.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
No, I talk a lot. I don't have anything else I want to say other than I'm really grateful, and it's been fantastic to talk to you guys. And this is another step forward in act local, but think global.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Matt, I ask this at the end of every podcast. Now that you got to know us a little bit and be on the show, who are a couple people that you know personally you think we should have on as future guests?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, if you could manage it, I think a conversation between Tim and Neil would be extraordinary. It would take a long time, I would imagine, but I think you'd probably share a similar humor and a similar life trajectory and experience. That would be pretty incredible. And I'm trying to think of, we're about to assemble a panel of people for a big fundraising lunch we're doing that have overcome adversity outside MND. I think that's an interesting one too, because I think a lot of people think that suffering is unique to each disease, but I think that the things you learn and the inspiration you can take can come from other areas as well. Who would I suggest in that situation? Well, let me see how these 3 people we've got on our panel go, and if I think they're any good, I'll send you an email.
Awesome.
Matt, thank you for the work you are doing through FightMND and for helping turn public attention into real support for people living with this disease. I know how much that matters from the inside. God bless you, your family, Neil, and everyone fighting this fight in Australia and around the world.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's been my absolute pleasure. It's actually kept me off emails for an hour and a quarter too. As you've probably gathered, I prefer to talk rather than type.
Now we got to let you go so you can go keep raising that money. Sell some beanies.
I'm on it.